show has been a long time in the making, and I finally got around to starting the show. My name's Robin Jackson, and you're listening to Cult Life, my new podcast show that will air on a weekly basis, where we unpack all things cult, be it religious, be it political, be it financial cults that we find, just the whole cult phenomenon. But a background first. I am a former Jehovah's Witness, brought up in the organization. I got baptized at the age of 13 and eventually left in 2004, then published my memoir in 2005, which just chronicles my journey through the whole Jehovah's Witness organization and how it affected me personally, and how it affected my relationship with my family and friends that I had growing up in the organization, the Watchtower organization. So I speak from experience when it comes to the cult issue. I also wrote a second book in 2008, which was called Cults, How They Work, where I actually take you on and educate you on the whole recruitment techniques. Well, the recruitment techniques that these groups, a lot of groups that are similar to the Watchtower organization, the recruitment techniques that are used, how they draw in people, how they draw in youngsters, and just all out what to look out for, how to protect yourselves, how to protect your children from being drawn into these destructive and dangerous groups. So let's talk about my journey first of all. As I mentioned before, I'm a former Jehovah's Witness, and I was involved in a lot of activism around about the 2005 year and subsequent years, in which I actually, my book got out and was published, and it was a huge upshake in South Africa at the time. I started getting featured on radio shows. I was featured on television shows, newspaper articles, just speaking about my experiences with the witnesses and how it came about that I actually left the group and speaking about the inner workings of the group. For me, there were alarm bells going off all through my childhood as I grew up in the organization. As I said, baptized at the age of 13, but the very next year, one of the very big alarm bells that went off for me was the change in the baptismal questions that happened the following year. And this was a big alarm bell for me. It's something that stood out. While I was sitting at a convention down in Port Elizabeth here in South Africa, and the baptismal questions were read out to the candidates at the time, I was baptized for a year. And of course, when I got baptized, the questions were slightly different. It was more Bible-based. However, the following year, the second question that was asked to the candidates, the baptismal candidates at the time, was, do you recognize that your baptism is now into Jehovah's organization? Which was, now you are basically being baptized into an organization, which was contrary to what I was taught, that baptism was in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, which was the questions I'd answered. So that was a huge alarm bell for me. And then subsequently, my journey, I uncovered many other aspects of the witness organization that the organization would rather hide from its rank and file. And one of the big issues was the child sexual abuse issue at the time. It was very much hidden. I spoke out, I did research, and I found out that how the two-witness rule protected child sexual abusers in the organization, and very often the victims were treated unfairly and justly, And this just didn't sit right with me. It's something that I couldn't keep quiet about, and subsequently I, of course, wrote my 2 books. The other issue I had at the time with the organization was the blood issue, and how this doctrine actually caused destruction and devastation and tragedy in a lot of families within South Africa, but not only South Africa, but worldwide. And I couldn't reconcile the doctrine around the whole blood issue, and the explanation that the Watchtower organization actually gave in its publications just didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. I couldn't reconcile the whole blood doctrine. I saw families being devastated by it. I saw families lose loved ones, and of course, whenever you mention Jehovah's Witnesses in the media, it's always been the blood doctrine. The media always gave coverage to that issue. But I started, when I got featured in the media, I started highlighting the other issues that the witnesses were not very well exposed to. We all know what an insular cult and insular organization it is. So the rank and file are not exposed to a lot of the other issues that are kept hidden, and one of them, of course, was the child sexual abuse issue, the association with the United Nations at the time, and the explanation that was given at the time. So that was a big issue for me. And I subsequently left the organization because, in part, I was a history buff as well. I started researching the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but not only by using their publications by the Watchtower organization. Of course, any Jehovah's Witness would know that you are encouraged to only use Watchtower publications to research, be it doctrine or the history of the organization. Furthermore, I went a step further and I did independent research, which is actually frowned upon, and uncovered the hidden history behind the Watchtower organization. And that's when I found the discrepancies in how the organization chooses to paint its history compared to the actual historical evidence that was there for all to see. So my journey was a long one, and a lot of people who come out of high control groups and who actually come out of cults will tell you this, that it's not an overnight decision, and partly because of the consequences that are associated with leaving organizations like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Excommunication, disfellowshipping, and shunning is a practice that is used to keep the rank and file and the members in check, and to instill this fear, this mental fear in them that as soon as you leave the organization, you will be cut off from your support structure, from your family, from your friends, and that's what keeps a lot of people reluctant to actually talk about issues and to expose unjust practices or cover-ups within the organization. So that was one of the big issues for me as well. The shunning practice did not sit right with me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I saw the devastation and destruction it caused to many who were shunned. The mental illness and depression that many of these former witnesses who were shunned and cut off from family and their social support structure immediately. It's done in an instant, so you lose friends and family in an instant. They are not allowed to talk to you, not allowed to associate with you, and you are basically left to your own devices. So that was a big thing for me. So this whole shunning practice to me was just a cruel way of dealing with people who do not disagree with your doctrine, former witnesses, or be it somebody who was excommunicated or disfellowshipped outright by the organization for so-called their wrongdoing, so-called wrongdoing on the part of these members, or somebody who willingly chooses to disassociate themselves from the Jehovah's Witness organization because they might not agree with the practices anymore, or the doctrine, so to speak. So the shunning practice for me and the whole disfellowshipping issue was really, really a devastating practice, and still is up until today. That hurts individuals, it hurts families, and it's just really, really a cruel practice that I could not agree with anymore. So I, as I said, left the organization. I did not formally disassociate myself. I was not going to play by their rules anymore, and partly because I saw that because you were the organization was lying to me in the first place and covering up all these issues and wasn't truthful to me. I was not going to play by their rules anymore. I decided that they did not have any authority over my life anymore. I wrote a letter to the elders after an incident, but it was not a disassociation letter. It was a letter exposing or just explaining why I choose not to be called a Jehovah's Witness anymore, but it wasn't a formal disassociation letter, so to speak. And we'll talk about that letter in a subsequent show. But also, during my research, I came into contact with many other members of groups that were high control as well. And I'm speaking about the Mormons, I'm speaking about Scientologists, and other groups within South Africa. And I met up with a lot of people who had similar experiences within their specific religious groups or some of it political groups as well. And the discussion around a lot of these topics just proved to me how similar the whole, all the techniques are that these groups use to keep people in and to make sure that they abide by the rules and to keep control over a lot of these members in the organization. And this led me to research the whole cult phenomenon. I then wrote the second book, as I said before. It was called Cults, How They Work, and released that book and mainly because for the South African public to see that, within South Africa, we have the very same issues that the United States or Europe are facing. Because my discussion with a lot of people on the street was, and their views were, we thought that this whole cult phenomenon was actually an American issue. We'd hear reports from the US about cults and cult suicides and the likes, but many were unaware that within the South African context, there were groups operating here on a large scale level and some on a smaller scale. And it was interesting to see the public's reaction with regard to this. And that's partly why I decided to start this broadcast, this podcast show, because recently we had another cult incident in South Africa where the Seven Angels Ministries cult in the rural Eastern Cape area made headlines with some of its members being killed and shootout between the members and police. And then It was exposed that this group was holding children hostage and captive in their compound, and using religious doctrine, using Christian-based doctrine, and twisting the scriptures to suit their doctrine and to keep these people in. And I was called in or interviewed on 3 radio stations after the whole incident, just to get my view on the whole incident and to explain this whole phenomenon and why it happened, in this rural Eastern Cape village in South Africa. And this brings me to a topic where during the 1980s, South Africa was very well known for the apartheid era, the oppression that black and non-white citizens experienced during the apartheid regime. And the witnesses actually thrived during this era in South Africa. And this was, in my view, a direct result of the oppression that the government of the time, the apartheid government of the time, wielded over its citizens. And I think people in the underprivileged areas and the non-white population saw the message that the witnesses were preaching as an escape from the everyday pressures of the apartheid regime, and saw this as a way out. But we'll talk about this later on in subsequent shows, how societal issues impact cult recruitment, and how cults actually pounce on the societal issues that many people face on a daily basis. And this was something that I actually looked at while I was in the Jehovah's Witness organization during the apartheid era. As I said, I got baptized in 1983, which was very much still the apartheid. And the government was still very much the apartheid government, where there was a segregation between non-whites and white citizens in the country. So I think this played a massive part in the growth of Jehovah's Witnesses under the apartheid government, and how it affected, non-white societies. However, within the white community in South Africa, the Jehovah's Witness white community, there was the issue of conscription. That was an issue that the white brothers and sisters, or white brothers, had to face, because all white males in South Africa had to do 2 years of military service conscription. And this was an issue that the witnesses had to navigate around in terms of their men of white males in the organization in South Africa at the time, and how to navigate this issue of conscription in South Africa. And we'll talk a little bit about that in subsequent episodes. So I felt that there was this need to really get the message out there. I think that the Watchtower organization at the moment is on the back foot with all the lawsuits and court cases that are happening around the world very much simultaneously with regard to the child sexual abuse issue and how it was handled. We've seen the Australian Royal Commission that the Australian government has set up to investigate the Watchtower organization and how they treat children. We've seen the court cases in America, huge payouts with gag orders in some cases, which actually tells you another thing. Why should there be gag orders? And then we've seen Canada also now starting to latch onto the whole issue of child sexual abuse and how people are treated in the organization, how children are not safe within the confines of the congregation and the organization as a whole. I I think Jehovah's Witnesses and the organization will start feeling the pinch. It's going to hit their pocket very, very hard. And I think it's about time that the South African public and Africa as a whole get exposed to a lot of these, the issues surrounding this. And it's time that South African victims speak out, and expose the doctrines and the practices with regards to shunning child sexual abuse within the organization in South Africa as well. So I will be having many guests on the show going forward, getting their views and telling their stories coming out of the group. Hoping to get a lot more South Africans and their stories on the show. And I want to show that this is a global phenomenon. It's a global issue that impacts not only first world countries, but it impacts South Africa and Africa as a whole. And I think it impacts our people here in South Africa and Africa more so because our people have much more to lose than people in citizens and members in first world countries. So I'm hoping to latch onto a lot of these people who are willing to speak out and use this platform as a way to expose and to educate around the issue of cults, so to speak. So I'm hoping you will join me in subsequent shows. We will be highlighting many other groups as well, like the Mormons, like the Brethren. And these are a lot of groups, Scientology, that operate in South Africa as well. And I've been in contact with former members of these groups and who are willing to speak out and appear on the show. So it's going to be an interesting perspective going forward. I'm also hoping to speak to many of the international activists around some of these cults, like Jehovah's Witness, former Jehovah's Witness activists that are very much active in exposing the doctrines and these practices, these destructive practices of the organization. I'm hoping to speak to them on the show, as well as other members from other groups, and internationally, just to get the international perspective and the South African perspective as well. So listen in. I hope you follow on a weekly basis. The show will be put up on a weekly basis. You can also follow me on my Twitter handle. It's at RobinJackson70. That's on Twitter. My website is robinjackson.co.za. There'll be information there. It's my blog. I'll be putting up a lot of information up there as well. So I'm really just hoping to kickstart the activism from South Africa and to hook up with the global community in this sense as well. So please join me, follow me wherever you are. It's a podcast, so you can download episodes as well. I'll post the link on to a lot of my other social media pages that you could follow. And also just email me if you've got ideas, if you've got your perspective, if you've got something to say, if you've got an idea, and just to hear your viewpoints as well going forward. I would love to hear your points of view with regards to the cult issue. So that's the wrap-up for the very first episode of Cult Life. I hope to engage with a lot of you out there who are listening to the show worldwide and South Africa. Please, if you're in South Africa, we want to give this a South African perspective as well. Please feel free to contact me via the show page or my email that'll be put up as well. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your points of view. I want to hear your story, and let's get it out there. It's time that these destructive practices get exposed, And let's warn people of how to protect their children. To me, that's the biggest issue. It's to protect the children within the organization. They are not adequately protected. We need to get the Witness, the Jehovah's Witness organization, the Watchtower organization, to change their policy, their two-witness rule, their policy on how they treat child sexual abuse. It's a huge thing for me. It's something that's very close to my heart. The protection of children and their rights. It's something that we need to address in this country. We know that South Africa has a very high rate of abuse, and we can't go on if we have an organization in the country that protects the perpetrators, and makes the victims of these abuses the bad ones, and don't protect these children. So that's something that's really, really close to my heart. I need people to speak out more. So please join me. Feel free to contact me. I will be uploading shows on a weekly basis with different topics, different guests on the show, and it's going to be interesting. So I'm hoping you'll join me wherever you are in the world. With that, I'm signing off and speak to you next week. Bye for now.